Welcome to Raw Politik. I'm joined today by James Schneider, Momentum co-founder and former director of strategic communications for Jeremy Corbyn, and now communications director at Progressive International. He's been at the heart of grassroots insurgency and global strategy. Few are better placed to help us decode the shifting political landscape in Britain and beyond. So, James, we had a wonderful chat with Jeremy a few months ago, and he alluded to the fact that he would be starting a new party. And of course, it's in the news now, it's been launched. Is it a time for politics to be based more on compassion and care? And is that realistic? And perhaps we can talk a bit, Jeremy, about the UK political scene, where you're seeing two parties with very little differences, the same dogma, the same ideology, the same austerity measures. I mean, perhaps you can speak to that and also talk about your own vision for a new system, a new economic system.
Well, you're quite right with what you just said. The first point is that politics ought to be based on compassion and solidarity with the people that are worst affected by a cruel system. And if you lose that empathy for the rough sleeping beggar on the street, for the refugee that's trying to look for a place of safety, the person who's going through a mental health crisis because nobody wants to know them, if you just lose any sense of empathy for them and you just see politics as a process of political maneuver, gossip and games, then you end up with the kind of system we have where the levels of inequality are growing, the levels of absolute poverty, even in the richest countries like Britain and the USA, are increasing. And you then end up with oppression in order to control the levels of protest. You have to look at it from the other way around, and which is why I find the direction of political travel that the Labour Party has gone in over the past 4 years very depressing. I was proud to lead the Labour Party and proud to begin to move it in a direction of the politics of empathy rather than the politics of austerity, which is what I inherited.
I would love to hear your view. And you've always said that transformative politics requires narrative ambition as much as policy. So what does that actually mean, and how are you feeling about the new party?
It's very exciting. And it's not just me who's excited. Over 700,000 people in the UK have signed up to participate in the founding of a new party. And I think that scale of enthusiasm and excitement is because of the huge gap, the huge hole in British politics for a political force which is not only genuinely on the side of the overwhelming majority of people, but is also owned by them. And that's what's happening with this founding process. The party is being started by the people who've joined up to set it up. It's not a dictate from Jeremy Corbyn or Zara Sultana. They're stewarding the process alongside 4 other MPs that they sit with in the Independent Alliance in Parliament. And it is desperately needed. In Britain, we've had the last 20 years, let's say, have been pretty bad for most people. Living standards for the majority of people have gone down. Public services have been cut back, while the wealth of the super rich has absolutely soared away. And many of our rights, which we thought were going to be obviously respected, have been stripped back and under attack. All the while we continue to pursue a foreign policy which is not our own, which is run out of the US State Department, meaning that we're not a fully independent state and not a full democracy. So now really is the time to put something different on the table, which is what's happening and what will shape up now over the rest of this year.
How is this different to previous efforts, would you say?
I would say there are over 700,000 reasons for why it's different. I mean, it's a mass operation immediately, and I think that's very, very different. There have been efforts to create parties to the left of Labour beforehand, and they've never been able to reach a kind of mass level.
Yeah.
And that because of primarily because of Jeremy's tremendous reach and the kind of authority and respect that people have for him right across the left, but also because of the desperate need. I mean, we are now 14 months into a new government. We had 14 years of Conservative rule, which I think by kind of any objective measure was the worst government in the history of Britain since, most people were allowed to vote. Living standards fell, children got shorter, numeracy went down. Things that you assume year on year are going to go up while things go up and down. Major things got worse and set us on a very bad trajectory with no sign out of it. Now, Labour came in on a very stripped back platform saying there would be change, and people have seen no change. So that's why this is a different proposition entirely. People are ready to act. They're ready to build a new party right across the country. And that's why it's going to be, yes, we'll have people in Parliament and that number will grow, I'm sure. But it's really going to be the activity of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people around the country building an alternative and also building popular power, building organisations that we need, trade unions, tenants' unions, bill payers, alliances, to defend our interests in the here and now and to build a political alternative.
Yeah, I think YouGov polls from July, so last month, show that 18% of Britons would consider voting for a Corbyn-led party in a future election. I'm sure those numbers have gone up. If you watch the mainstream media, of course, you would think that Corbyn isn't supported the way the polls show. But the question is, under the first past the post system, new parties often get crushed. So should proportional representation be central from day one?
I mean, I'm in favour of proportional representation, but I wouldn't put it as the first thing, because how are you going to get it? And it looks a little bit self-serving if you're putting it that front and centre, when really the biggest issue is living standards, which are being, really squeezed for the majority of people. And there are so many other, super majoritarian things that people want, that 70, 80% of the country want. Public ownership of our utilities, a wealth tax, no more arms to Israel. These are things which the vast majority of people want and that we could build a programme around. Of course, the programme is going to be built by the members of the party democratically, but those are the things which people want. Now, speaking about the electoral system in particular, first past the post is a weird and not good one, and it's not the one that you would set up if you were going from starters. But it is the one in which we currently have, and we have to fight within it.
Can you just explain, because we have a global audience, what it means?
So first past the post means whoever wins in one particular constituency, in one area, they get the seat. So you could get, for example, 20%, but evenly spread all around the country and win 0 seats because you aren't getting 50% in one seat. So it throws up, or can throw up, very weird results. Like, for example, in the election we had last year, Labour got 1/3 of the vote, but got nearly 2/3, or got 2/3 of the seats. So it throws up these very weird things. And generally speaking, it keeps out smaller parties because only the big parties can win. But British politics is completely broken open now. At the last election, 5 independents to the left of Labour won. I think since 1945, there'd been 2 before that. And they won in supposedly safe Labour seats. Jeremy Corbyn is one of those. I ran that campaign, but 4 other as well. And those 5, along with Zara Sultana, make up the Independent Alliance, which is stewarding this founding process of the party.
I just want to quote what Jeremy and Zara have said about the party and its intentions to take on the rich and powerful. Actually, they posted a very touching statement, which maybe I'll read to the viewers later. But how exactly do you predict that they will take on the rich and powerful in real terms?
So I think in 2 very concrete ways. The first is by saying the right thing about the issue of the day loudly and clearly every single day. The majority position for most people has been chased out of British politics since Jeremy stopped being leader of the Labour Party. The overwhelming majority of people, like 80% of people, want a wealth tax. They want public ownership of key utilities. They want an increase in the minimum wage. They want money for public services. And they don't want to fund illegal wars and genocide abroad. These are the things which the overwhelming majority of people want. And not only are they not represented in Parliament apart from by our small band of MPs, but they're pushed out of public discourse as well. So by having a party that is loudly and proudly saying the things which the overwhelming majority of people already want, will itself make a big difference to take on the entrenched wealth and power of the few. But then it's about all of us. We have to break the model of politics where we are spectators looking to the leadership, hoping that they do good things and posting about it a bit online. We are living now after 50 years of counter-revolution, which in the global north has meant the dismantling of working class institutions, and in the south has meant the dismantling of sovereign development. We are after 50 years of this horrific process, and we need to build back up our power. So it's not just enough to support Jeremy and Zara and anyone else saying and doing good things. Of course, we can do that, but it's also building powerful institutions ourselves. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about trade unions, tenants unions, cooperatives, debtors clubs, community kitchens, all sorts of things which make life nicer, which help with life as it currently is, and build the institutional power so that when we win office, we will actually able to be in power. Because what happens when you get into government, and you see this throughout history, particularly of sort of weaker-willed centre-left governments when they get in, all of the powers on you once you're in government come from one side. All the pressure comes from one side. You have the generals telling you you have to behave in a particular way. You have the corporate lobbyists pushing you in a particular way. You have the civil servants who have relationships with those groupings telling you you have to act in a particular way. And we need massive counterpower, huge organized counterpower, so that we can have very reasonable things like the rent doesn't go up above what people can pay every year. But in order to do that, we're going to have an organized tenants union across the country that is able to not just say, yes, we work to elect some people that want to do the thing, but now we're going to force it through now that they're in office. We are going to be arm in arm with them, not standing behind them as cheerleaders. We're going to be part of this process. And we need that for everything that we want, because it's not going to be handed to us. We know from our experience in the Labour Party, where we were being sabotaged by forces that didn't want those things within our groups of our MPs and some of the staff. And we know that in the state, it's going to be significantly tougher than that. The interests that will be trying to prevent us doing very normal things like having publicly owned water, or having a reasonable tax on multimillionaires, or making sure that cladding on housing, on big blocks of housing, isn't flammable. I mean, this should be absolutely basic stuff, but there are big forces at play to stop it being absolutely basic stuff. So that's why we need to build up power at every single level. And that's why everybody who has all 700,000 plus people, firstly, we need to make that many more. You know, we need to be a powerful, growing movement of millions. And our everyday life needs to involve building up our collective power.
So what I'm hearing from you is that this party should be movement first rather than personalities first. Is that right? So in that case, who leads, who joins, and does it necessarily have to be fronted by recognizable figures?
So I think there's always a relationship between those two things, and it's not an either or. The same thing I'm saying, you know, we need to build social power in our neighborhoods and communities, and we need to be making a big noise in national politics and in the media. We have to be doing both. We can't only be doing one. Now, leaders are extremely important. You know, I said earlier on that we wouldn't have the 700,000 people signed up if it weren't for Jeremy Corbyn. He has nearly 100% name recognition. People trust him because they see that he's taken the same positions his entire life, and he doesn't give in, and he's also not in it for himself. So you do need leaders, but the question is, are you leader heavy, or is what you're doing generating more leaders in workplaces, in communities, in struggle all the way along? And that's the type of leadership that we need.
Such a sincere, decent and bright man. Really, the way the Labour Party has treated him is emblematic of its own decline. To first accuse Jeremy Corbyn of all people of anti-Semitism is absolutely ridiculous. The man has not one bone of bigotry in his body. To accuse him, it's ridiculous. He stood up against all forms of xenophobia, discrimination. He stands for all people who are weakened and who have struggled and so on. I just find it so hard to talk about UK politics without thinking first about what was done to the people who also followed him, who were inspired to enter politics and so on. Wretched treatment of that enormous base of people. Not only Mr. Starmer, but the entire Labour Party should be ashamed of itself for how it had behaved and how it continues to behave.
Yes, recognisable, fierce national leadership, which is creating thousands, tens of thousands of leaders across the country who are going to be needed to take forward the fight if we are going to be able to win the very decent, basic things that we want to secure human dignity for all.
So you've worked with Jeremy in the past, and he's a friend of mine and a friend of the show. But what would you advise him to do differently this time, if anything?
It's a completely different beast. I mean, we're now setting something up from scratch that's got huge benefits and huge challenges. The huge challenges are the Labour Party already exists. It already has structures. It already has some forms of decision-making mechanisms. We're starting all of that up from scratch. And it is, I'll tell you, it's difficult. It's not a straightforward thing. It's not easy to create legitimate decision-making structures before you have a legitimate decision-making structure. It's not easy for people to know exactly, what role they should be playing and where and how. These are all difficult things. But we are going to be able to do it earnestly putting forward our politics in a way where we won't be constrained by a parliamentary Labour Party which is much more closely aligned with the basic status quo interests, with the political media state class, which serves the ruling class in Britain, in this country, much more aligned with them, and some of the top bureaucrats in the party who are also, more aligned with the parliamentary party against the leadership. So we're not going to have to deal with those things. I think the main thing that we were unable to do, because we were spending so much time fighting to stay in position within the Labour Party, that meant that the hundreds of thousands of people who joined, their main task was often fighting within the party, fighting to keep us in position, fighting to win positions to conference, just fighting to be allowed to be there, fighting for legitimacy. And I hope that this time we're able to do a different model of politics, one that which says, we've got 3,000 people in this neighbourhood. What are we going to do? Let's go and knock on doors and make sure that in 5 years' time, we've got 10,000 members of a tenants' union who are getting their deposit back, who are not having rent rises. That's the basis on which I think we can build not only sustainable electoral power, but real power, real social power on which any political project is going to be fundamentally based.
Yes, I agree. I think there was a lot of energy spent on just defending oneself, in the case of Jeremy, and now you can really just focus on the issues that matter. And you can see that on, interviews that he's done with Novara Media and also Zara, just that sense of lightness and excitement and joy at the possibilities that may come.
Yeah.
So I totally get you. So we have this founding conference that's planned for the autumn. Everyone, of course, is obsessed with the name, which I actually think is irrelevant. I think what's more interesting is how this conference will shape the party's direction and leadership structure. So how do you predict that conference? What do you predict it will look like? Who's going to be there? And how are things actually going to take place?
So I can't tell you for certain, because these are things which are still being worked out and debated. So I can only tell you what I think and what I would like to see. So I want to see a huge participatory process around the country to decide the key things to set up a party. That's not everything that a party does. I think that comes later. We need to decide key things. What's our political orientation? What's in our constitution? How are we deciding who are in our committees and in our leadership? Those are the key things we need to decide. And they're not just technical questions. These are questions of strategy. And I think strategy should be a mass activity which everybody should be involved in. So I'd like to see over the coming months a big participatory process with meetings right around the country where people are able to break into groups of 10 or 12. Yes, there can be some speeches and some music and some food, but the main bit of it to be people actually getting to discuss quite high level questions of structure and strategy together as a movement, and all of those thoughts and ideas to be fed back into a process which will then deliver motions or options or a draft constitution or whatever that might be to a conference later in the autumn. And I think that conference needs to, yes, have people physically there and be big and exciting and look and feel different, but it also needs to have hybrid so people can engage online. And I think it needs to have fully online voting. So it's not a first come, first served situation. And we're really involving everybody in the participation. Now, once you have structures set up, you might want a different model. You know, once you have very well functioning branches, sometimes a delegate model makes more sense for the deliberations to flow up and down an organization, but we don't have that. So I think the only way that we can do this is we host these big participatory deliberative meetings, allow everyone to have their input, not offer any extra chance for one particularly organized group or another to put forward their thing, give everybody the same stake, and people vote through what they want at a conference in the autumn. And that then creates, you know, I was talking about the decision-making structure beforehand, how you create a decision-making structure without having one. You know, that will give us one. We'll have a sovereign authority. It will decide what it will decide. Everybody will then abide by that, and we can get on with the process of building the party right around the country.
What you're saying about, you know, giving equal weight to participants and trying to make it as inclusive as possible, what do you suspect that the relationship with the Greens will turn out to be?
Of course, it depends on what happens in their leadership election, which they're currently having. And I hope that if Zach Polanski wins, then it will be much easier. They have their own democratic processes as well in the party, and we will have our own. But I would hope that we would be able to come to a kind of grown-up way of cooperating in some kind of electoral pact, something which doesn't water down our politics, which doesn't cede territory in any particular direction. By territory, I mean ideological, policy, etc. But recognises that in some parts of the country they are going to be better placed to win, and in others we will be, and that's a sensible way, I think, of working together. I also think there's a potential for joint primaries for mayoral candidates, which I think could be really interesting. It's hard to generate the same interest for an internal party campaign, but I'm thinking about in 2028, many of our big cities have mayoral elections. So in 2027, say, if you ran joint primaries with a couple of Green candidates, a couple of our candidates, and use that to, one, find the best candidate, set the race somewhat more alike, insert some jeopardy so people have a bit more at stake in it, and it's more interesting as well to the media and people following along. And you can build your campaign structure a year ahead of time. You know, find out your areas of strength, build data, build campaigners, build resources. And I think there are lots of things that we can do if we're a bit creative.
So we've had Len McCluskey on the show, and you mentioned a little while ago sort of the role of trade unions. How do you see them playing their role with this new party? Do you sense that they could be activated further?
Of course, but it will take time. I mean, trade unions are massive democratic organizations, and so decisions are not just the whims of their leaders, they are decisions taken by the whole body. So if trade unions that are currently affiliated to Labour want to end up being affiliated to the new party, that will take time. They have to win that through their own internal conferences, win not giving money to Labour, win disaffiliating from Labour, win building up a relationship with the new party. So these things will take time. That said, it is absolutely vital, and it's work that's already beginning, that relationships are built at all levels with the trade union movement, at the rank and file especially, to help give it a particular class character, but also with the general secretaries, with the leadership, and also with the organised lefts within trade unions. And I think all of these things, this is a big, strand of work, I think, which will come out of the conference. I would hope would come out of the conference. and people would take very seriously.
So just to make something explicit that seems to be implicit in our conversation, is Labour beyond repair, in your opinion?
Yeah,
okay.
totally.
Okay, let's move on then so we are painting sort of a picture of hope. This new party is happening, the conference is happening. It's an opportunity to do things differently in the wake of extreme austerity, the support of genocide and so on. But the fact is the UK at the moment is becoming a place of extreme repression. We've seen that with the whole Palestine action situation. We saw recently an image of an 89-year-old woman dragged away at a Palestine protest. So what is actually happening? What is the actual state of democracy in Britain at the moment? Is it an authoritarian shift? Is it a political miscalculation? How are you seeing things?
So I think that there's a spectrum from liberal to far right, and these are different modes of governance for the capitalist order. And when it feels secure and self-confident, you get more towards the liberal end of the spectrum, and we're allowed more rights and more freedoms. And when it feels insecure and anxious, you get more towards the authoritarian, more towards the far right end of the spectrum. And when you view it like that, it's not surprising that this is what we're seeing, because as we were discussing earlier, life is getting harder for most people in the country. So under those conditions, people are questioning everything. They're questioning why do we have to accept getting poorer every year? Why do we have to accept working more hours? Why do we have to accept just everything getting really, really expensive? And that means that they have to criminalize dissent, or they feel they have to criminalize dissent to try to hold on to things. Hasn't just started with Palestine Action. This goes back, this has been a whole body of work for about 5 years. There was the Police and Crime Courts Bill, which I think passed in 2021 or 2022, which says that a protest can be stopped for being annoying. The word is annoying in the legislation. I mean, it's completely ridiculous. And there have been, this has just been accelerating. We've seen incredibly severe prison sentences for climate movement activists, 4.5 years for being on a Zoom meeting where things were discussed. I mean, it's really the state of repression is pretty high. And now, of course, it's gone up a whole other gear with Palestine Action's prescription, which makes them, under UK law, a terrorist organisation, which, to explain for your audience, that means that if I were to say anything which could be construed as supportive of them, I could be in line for 14 years in prison, which is just an absolutely absurd legal situation that many people have been put in. So people are protesting this in a number of different ways. You referenced the 89-year-old woman being dragged off. There have been huge mass arrest events. I think all of the people they arrested 500 people in Parliament Square the other day. I think all of them got let out. And the thing is, they will be let out because our prison system is overflowing. There was a thing, they're having to release quite serious criminals early, and some people who have been arrested for various protest offences are being put inside, which of course is not popular with the public, even if some people don't like the particular protesters. It's not their particular issue. The idea that they're being put in prison instead of people who've committed quite serious violent crime seems completely bizarre to most people. So it's ramping up, and I think it will continue to ramp up because there is no calm solution that the political media state class has to putting a lid back on the volatile politics that we have. I remember about a year ago, no, more than a year ago, it must have been 18 months ago, I was giving a talk at the Institute for Government, which is a kind of very fancy, august think tank with lots of high-level civil servants in the audience. And the mood in the room was so relaxed. They were like, oh, fantastic. Labour are going to come in soon. This was before the election. But they're like, Labour's going to come in. They're going to have a huge majority. Politics will get boring. Everything will get calm. The adults will be back, and we can just run things in the way in which we want. And I remember looking at these people like they were crazy, going, You have no plan to make people's lives better. Politics isn't volatile because, some demagogues got up on a soapbox and sort of made people volatile. Things are volatile because life is not getting better, and people can really feel that in their everyday lives. So I think we're going to have to do much more to resist state repression. It's going to amp up, not go down.
And of course, the Palestine Action Saga is a result of the Labour government's decision to defend a genocide and a genocidal state and be complicit in that. Talking about the new party, how do you think things would change? Do you suspect that they would work to put sanctions on the Zionist entity? Like, how do you think things would be dramatically different in terms of that policy?
So again, it's going to be set by the members, so I can't say precisely what it would be. But again, if you look at polling, where the overwhelming majority of people are in Britain, they do not want to be complicit in genocide. They do not want to sell arms to Israel. They want to see an expansion of sanctions, not just sanctioning two ministers for the crime of saying what Israel is actually doing and therefore embarrassing Israel's allies. We want to see action taken against the actual crimes that are taking place. We want to see action against genocide, occupation, and apartheid. And that is a very mainstream position in Britain. That is where the overwhelming majority of people are. So I imagine that coming out of any process would be something like that, would be quite a stark break. Because in foreign policy, Britain is not an independent country. We are semi-vassalized by the US. The policy position is to slip in behind where they are. And generally, the position of the opposition is to slip in behind where the government is. And so everyone can line up nicely and swim in the US-American slipstream. Now, that's not where most people are. You just see it in poll after poll after poll. There are about 8% of people in Britain who really love Israel's genocide. They're really into it. They think it's great. We should send more arms. They're really happy with it. 8%, right? In poll after poll after poll, that's sort of the number that you get. And you get 3/4, 7 out of 10, 7.5 out of 10, 8 out of 10 more saying, no, we're opposed to this and we want to see a change of policy. So if we had a democratic policy in Britain and our party's purpose is to provide a democratic mechanism for the overwhelming majority of people to be represented, you would get a totally different foreign policy, and one which broke with great grave crimes.
And I think the majority that you speak about not only realize that genocide is wrong and illegal, but more so that the struggle is global, right? Yeah. So I'm just wondering a few things. So how should the new UK party situate itself? As a local fight or as part of the global movement initially? And then if you could just speak a little bit about progressive, international, and sort of that global strategy.
Yeah. So I think you have to necessarily do both, and you can't build political power only in one country in a global system which is dominated by US imperialism, where there are 800 military bases, where we have tens of thousands of troops in our own country, in Britain, US troops, where we might soon be paying money to fly US nuclear weapons around Britain for some reason, where we don't have an independent nuclear policy because we have to go and get the warheads from Georgia, and they haven't had a successful launch in over a decade, yet we spend billions and billions and billions when we're told there's no money for stuff that ordinary people would benefit from. So it's very clear, I think, that we have the thing that unites the foreign and the domestic in Britain is democracy. We don't have a democratic economy, we don't have a democratic politics, and we don't have a democratic foreign policy. We don't have a foreign policy which respects the basic sovereignty of other states and acts to undermine their sovereignty, particularly states in the South, in support of US policy, which is generally speaking in support of US multinational companies. And this is something which has to be connected, and I think will be connected. Because our revolt here in Britain, we hope it's very successful. We hope it goes a long, long way to advancing democracy for people in Britain. Will only be successful if it's connected to those in the rest of the world. Now, we see, and I see this a lot with my work with the Progressive International, large areas of the South, of the global South, are already trying to assert their own sovereignty. They're trying to assert their own right to develop in the way in which they want. That is a revolt against the current global system, which is happening at a very large scale. And we here in the North, we need to connect our revolts up to that bigger thing, because that's what is going to happen over the course of this century. The two major things that are going to happen, which we have to keep in our eye, one is climate breakdown, and the other is the challenge of US imperialism and whether the peoples of the world are going to be able to live in dignity and in mutual respect. And therefore, our movement has to be connected to those things. Does that mean that that's the first thing that we talk about always? No, I don't think so. I think the cost of living is the most significant thing for most people, and it does connect through to everything else. There is a reason why you are being price gouged in two places on your energy. There is a reason why Cargill just paid out record dividends because of climate shocks. You know, all of these things are connected, but the entrance point, the way that we go in, and also where we organize. You know, our job should be to organize to make people more powerful, and that goes for states of the South, that goes for tenants in Manchester, that goes for workers in Bolton. It's all that, you know, it's the same basic principle. And we're going to need a lot more of that if we're going to overcome the entrenched wealth and power, not only in Britain, but around the world, because it is extremely powerful. I mean, just using the example of the genocide in Gaza, because it's so stark. You know, this is something that's been going on for 2 years, and people in Britain don't support it. They just don't support. You know, if we lived in what we're supposedly meant to live in, a democracy where people want something, and yes, through some mechanism of representation, and maybe it doesn't happen instantly, but then you get a change of outcome. And that's not what we have. That's not what we've had at all. And it's the same on issue after issue after issue. You know, public ownership of water, it's just like such a complete no-brainer. You know, everyone, from people who consider themselves quite far on the right of politics to all the way on the left, everything in between, can see that it makes absolutely no sense to give public assets to private companies with no debt, watch them ramp up debt, pay out in dividends to their shareholders almost exactly the same amount that they've taken on as debt, and then pump sewage into our water systems and go, oh, sorry, it's, you know, it's not our fault, it's a very difficult situation. You know, it's absurd. And anyone can see it's absurd.
Yeah, I think your point about those linkages just reminds me of the last paragraph of the joint statement from Jeremy and Sultana, where, if you just allow me to read it, it's short. It says, it's time for a new kind of political party, one that is rooted in our communities, trade unions, and social movements, as you said, but one that also builds power in all regions and nations, and one that belongs to you. I just think that's a beautiful way to have ended the statement. James, is there anything else you'd like to add as we conclude?
No, I mean, we could talk for, I'm sure we could talk for a very long time. We could talk about many other things, but no, it's been great chatting to you.
Okay, amazing. Thank you for joining us on Our
So
Politik.
much.